somber music of Steve McConnell to the song Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. Words, comfort ye, my people. Because everything that God accomplished through Messiah during these 50 days was to bring comfort to mankind. As we've said so many times, everything happens in our instant world. But the counting of the Omer is one of those events that slows the world down so that we can see the story of Messiah and his resurrection from the dead as a 50-day story. We can't miss the stunning purpose of the purpose-driven God who planned the story of redemption in these 50 days, the same 50 days, from Passover to Shavuot, our deliverance from Egypt out of slavery and darkness, to the light of the God of Israel revealing himself on Mount Sinai. Only the purpose-driven God could place the incredible story of the death and resurrection of Messiah into those precise 50 days. But tonight I want to do something because we hear the statements. Messiah was crucified from before time began. In other words, that God planned this before he even created creation. And that's true, except it sometimes sounds just like a platitude, like it's not understandable. What I want to go over with you tonight is a prelude to what we're going to study in the last half of the 50 days, the last 25 days between Yeshua's ascension and his resurrection, his ascension, and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit on Shavuot. The purpose of the song tonight for Nachamu is to comfort ye, my people. So as we look at this tonight, today is 50 days of Omer. Today is the 23rd day, 23 days of counting the Omer of Israel's journey from Egypt to Mount Sinai to meet with the God who set them free from 400 years of slavery as promised by God to Abraham. It's also 23 days that Messiah is risen from the dead. It's Tuesday, April 20th. It's 6 p.m. It's the 8th of Iyar. It's the 8th day of the second month. And the blessing for today, Hayom Shlosha ve'esrim, Yom Shehem Shlosha, Shavuot Ushnei Yamim be'Omer. Today is 23 days, which are 3 weeks and 2 days of the Omer. Today is 23 days. Messiah is risen. It is my hope that one of the great goals of counting the Omer is that each day we get to say 23 days of the Omer, 23 days Messiah is risen. And as we count these days, we are seeing this purpose-driven God making a point. But the point is even more powerful when we look at the prelude to all of it, which is the story of the flood of Noah. Now, some of you might be saying, what? But I'm going to show you something tonight. It's a good night to pause and do this because so much of this is going to take place in the latter half of the counting of the 50 days of Omer. So I want you to take a look at this with me because it's stunning. Nothing helps us to understand the purpose-driven God that planned the redemption of mankind before time began than to peer into the dates given in the story of the flood of Noah and how it revolves around Pesach and Shavuos. So as we look at this, tonight I want you to put on your thinking caps. If you haven't seen this before, you're going to be surprised. Now I'm going to put this on the larger screen so you can see this as I walk you through this. What I want you to see is a mystery of liturgy and the Jewish calendar in the story of the flood of Noah, in the narrative. And what we're going to look at is Genesis chapter 7, verse 10. After the 7 days, the floodwaters came on the earth, And I want you to underscore the 7 days. The floodwaters came on the earth in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the sky's windows open. Now, I'm a little ahead of ourselves today, but it's important because I want to be able to cover this very clearly. I'm going to repeat myself because it's too important. All right? What I want you to notice is this. I want you to notice that it says, after the 7 days, the floodwaters came on the earth. In the 600th year, on Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, the fountains of the earth burst open. Now, today's the 8th of ER, so we are a few days early, because this is actually the story of the 32nd day of Omer, but I want you to be prepared for it, because today it's only the 23rd day of Omer. The reason I want you to see this is because the story of the flood transcends the entire 1 year quarantine of Noah in the ark. What I want you to see and understand, and as we look at this slide, I want you to think about what I'm about to say. First of all, what is the 17th day of the second month? I'm going to put this back up, and I want you to look at it closely. Something that very few people are familiar with is a thing called Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni was Numbers 9, where God gave a commandment to those who were unclean during the first Passover, first anniversary of the Passover, where they couldn't keep the Passover because they were unclean. Moses sought the Lord, and he came back and he said, if someone is unclean, they will have to celebrate Passover in the second month, on the 14th day of the month. Now, why is this important? Because for so many years, I tried to understand. I saw the pattern of the Passover to Shavuot story in the flood narrative. But somehow I finally said out loud, Passover of the unclean. And all of a sudden I said, oh my gosh. The flood started on the 17th day of the second month because it's Pesach Sheni. It's the Passover of the unclean. And the world was unclean. But not only was it unclean, but if you look at this curious word now, I'm going to put the chart back up. I want you to see it. You see this word here? After 7 days, the floodwaters came on the earth. This is a repetition of the first verse in Genesis. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then it goes into the 7-day story of the restoration of the earth. From a wet planet that was dark and clothed in darkness, chaos. And isn't that the condition of the flood days of Noah? After 7 days is a way of God stating before the story. 7 days before it. And what does that bring us to? Listen to this. It doesn't even explain it, but it is a curious pattern all through Scripture. 7 days means God's about to do something to perfect something. So if you take the 17th day of ER and you count back 7 days, you know what you get? The 10th of ER. Now, why is that important? Because if you were unclean for Passover and you couldn't celebrate on the 14th day of the first month, you had to take the lamb on the 10th day of the month, the lamb for sacrifice, which was indeed the 10th of the month, was the day of Yeshua's triumphal entry into Jerusalem. On the 10th, the day you take the lamb. So the lamb was presented, not just in a triumphal entry, but it was a day to take the lamb and prepare him for sacrifice. So, with Pesach Sheni being the Passover of the unclean, means that it makes total theological sense that when God would judge the entire earth, because it was unclean, that he would not make it begin on the Passover, because Passover is a new beginning. It's a restoration story. And so the flood begins on the 17th day of the second month. Now watch this. I think this is stunning. So it's the 600th year of Noah's life in the second month, the 17th day of the month. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open and the sky's windows opened. It's kind of a reversal of the creation story, the segregating of the waters above and below and beneath the earth and way deep in the earth. And now it's in reverse, same language, same pattern. Now look at this next slide. So it rained on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. It takes us to the 27th of Sivan on the Jewish calendar. And then we go to Genesis 7:24. And look at the beauty of this statement. The water held power over the earth for 150 days. After 40-day judgment, 3 Jubilee periods of 50 days equals 150 days. Look at Genesis 8:1. And look at this number. I have to look at you when I say this. Look at these numbers. 40 days it rained day and night. Then there were 150 days, 3 Jubilees. And then God says this. And God remembered Noah, every living thing and all livestock with him in the ark. So God caused a wind, his ruach, just like in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. And the Spirit of God hovered over the waters and over the darkness in the creation narrative. The same exact thing happens here. The world is in the same state. God remembered Noah, every living thing, and all the livestock with him in the ark. So God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the water began to go down. On the Genesis 8:4, on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. In other words, the water was receding. The water was receding, and the scriptures makes it a point to tell us what day the ship stood still on top of Mount Ararat. Look at it again. 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. 17th of Tishri is the 3rd day of Sukkot. God's trying to make a point. The next date given, Genesis 8:5. The water kept going down until the 10th month of the 1st day of the 10th month, and the tops of the mountains were seen. The 1st of Tevet is the 7th day of Hanukkah. Genesis 8:13. The flood is coming to an end. By the 1st day of the 1st month, Nisan, of the 601st year, the water had dried up from off the earth. So Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and yes, the surface of the ground was dry. So, the surface of the ground was dry, but that doesn't mean you could step foot in a muddy, murky land that was soaking wet. It's dangerous. Surface was dry. It may look dry, but it wasn't dry. But, so Noah stays in the ark. Yes, the surface of the ground was dry. And it's the 1st of Nisan. The 1st of Nisan should be your beginning of days. The beginning of the new day, the new life for mankind made in the image of God, with 8 survivors and every living thing in it, are about to break forth into liberation, just like coming out of Egypt. They're about to come out of darkness and begin the process of re-entry into the world. You know, it's very interesting because some people think that's what's happening with the pandemic. So this month shall be the beginning of months, and it shall be the 1st month of the year to you. Happy New Year. Let's go back. The next date given is Genesis 8:14. And it was on the 27th day of the 2nd month that the earth was dry. 27th of Iyar. So today is the 8th of Iyar. It's almost 20 days away. 27th of Iyar, the 42nd day of Omer. 42 days of Israel's journey to Sinai. 42nd day of Messiah being risen. 2 days before the ascension, 2 days after the ascension of Messiah, and 8 days before Shavuot. The flood is going to land on Shavuos. Let's go back and look at it. We'll go over this again. Genesis 8:15, God spoke to Noah and said, "Go out of the ship, you and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out every living thing that is with you, and all flesh, including birds, livestock, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful and multiply." The be fruitful and multiply, the last time this was said was to Adam and Eve. It was the beginning of mankind. This is the re-beginning of mankind. And so God reiterates the same blessing: be fruitful and multiply. Let's continue. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons with him, every animal, every creeping thing, and every bird, whatever moves on the earth, after their families, went out of the ship. Genesis 8:15, God spoke to Noah, saying, "Go out of the ship, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out every living thing." On the 27th of Iyar, 42nd day of Omer, the very next day on the Jewish calendar in 1967, the 28th of Iyar, on the 28th day of Omer, the 28th day Messiah is risen, God returned Jerusalem back into Jewish hands. You should be stunned by that statement, because when we look at this, you should be stunned by the statement that God raised the nation of Israel from the dead on the 20th day of Omer, right in the middle of Yeshua's resurrection and his ascension into heaven on the 40th day. But just as the nation of Israel arrives at Mount Sinai, ready for 3 days before they meet with the God of Israel who set them out of Egypt, on this particular day, it's the 43rd day of the 28th of Iyar, 28th day of Omer, the 28th day Messiah is risen, God returned Jerusalem back into Jewish hands. The day after he calls Noah and his family and every living thing out of the ark. Wow. We'll close with this verse for this part. The next day after the 7th Sabbath, you shall count 50 days, and you shall offer a new meal offering to the Lord. And they baked it with yeast for the first fruits of the Lord. You shall present with bread 7 lambs without defect, a year old, 1 young bull, and 2 rams. And they shall be burnt offering to the Lord, and their meal offering and their drink offerings, even an offering made by fire of a sweet aroma to the Lord. Did you happen to notice that the clean animals were 7 of each kind? I'm thinking there were a few births on the ark. So the offering, they had enough. 7 couples of the clean animals were in the ark. They probably had quite a few offspring during that year in the ark. But notice the sacrifices were clean. So not only is the story that we don't find out about till Leviticus in chapter 23 in the story of the flood, but in the book of Leviticus, chapter 11, we actually hear for the first time about the laws of kashrut, and yet there are clean and unclean animals on the ark. And somehow the story of Noah revolves around a Jewish calendar not yet revealed until Leviticus 11. See, the whole flood story is a 1-year quarantine, a 1-year sabbatical, when the earth was unclean. And God washed the earth clean and said, "Be fruitful and multiply." So we have to stop tonight, but I'm doing this early because I want you to tell all your friends, because we're going to go back over this a few times. I promise you, this is some of the most exciting things you will ever see in the Word of God. And why is it important? Not only does God teach us to number our days, but he shows us that he numbered the days. He said God knows the number of the hairs in your head and your beard too. He knows the number of the stars in the heavens and the sands of the earth. He knows your down sitting and your uprising. And he always knows what time it is. His plan is so clear. His fingerprints are all over the flood narrative. And as we approach this, I'm saying this because I want us to be prepared, to be excited when we get to Pesach Sheni in a week. And also the coming of the manna, which takes place, believe it or not, during Pesach Sheni. That's when the manna begins. And that's a 7-day story. We got to stop. Tell your friends to listen to this one and tell them not to miss a single night of this devotion. Thank you for those who are supporting us. You can go to Shuv Yisrael and make a donation to help us. Our plan to reopen the synagogue on Erev Shavuot. We've been following this story of Noah and trying to plan for the reopening of our synagogue and for God to call us out of the ark. Call us out of this quarantine and say, be fruitful and multiply. We'll see you tomorrow night.